谢谢大家抽空，今天礼拜六来这边参加这个活动。今天完全没有稿子哈，只有24张 slide。那如果说其中有什么问题的话，可以举手，没问题。因为园艺这方面很多真的是包罗万象非常的广泛所以我说不定会遗漏某些部分，所以请举手说一下啊。
好。Switch.
No. We just started 2 minutes ago, but we'll do a rewind. I'm going to talk about all different topics, starting from the soil, how soil came about. So soil began with rocks. And rocks were formed by magma, as you can see in Hawaii right now. Magma is flowing out of the ocean, out of the island. Along with magma, as it cools out, it forms rocks and stone, and with wind and sun, expansion and contraction of the rocks and the stone, sand is formed. And these elements contain the essential minerals that we need for planting. So over the last millions of years, we have had millions and billions of storms that cause erosion. Again, expansion, contraction, flood, rocks rolling down off the mountainside. As a result, soil is formed. Now, soil is not quite, we don't call sand, mixture of sand and rocks, soil. It's just gravel. Nothing can grow on it. So, the smallest form would be, vegetation would be weed, tiny weeds coming up, and then you have animals such as rabbits, these macroorganisms that come and eat the grass, and eventually there's excretion from these animals and gets blended with the grass that become decomposed, and over time the organic materials and the rocks, sand, the mixture together becomes what we know as soil. So in soil you have about 50% minerals, 45% air, unless it's full of sand. Typically, soil is much lighter than sandbags, unless it's saturated with water. So there's 5% organic material. Now we know plants do rely on organic materials to grow. So as plants start to grow over time, if you are planting non-nitrogen generating plants such as beans, then nitrogen may become depleted. So you need to over time start to add compost to the mixture to amend the nutrients. So there are 3 major elements and other trace minerals. We'll talk about the 3. N, P, K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Potassium, let's start with potassium. What's this?
Ash.
It's a pot of ash. And potassium exists in a pot of ash. Potash. That's how the word came about. Branches, leaves, when it gets burned off, the ashes that's left is highly concentrated in potassium. So in this order, nitrogen, we all know encourages leaf growth. Phosphorus promotes root growth, blossoms, and fruiting. So it's sandwiched in the middle. And then at the end, it's easy to remember, NPK. The last element is an overall element that encourages plant growth. So you need to have a balanced mixture of the three. If you have too much nitrogen, then your leaves will grow like mad, but you may not get enough fruit, or root may not be healthy. So typically, seeds are cheap. So we get a packet of seeds, it's got 500 seeds, and we start to spread all over. Now, I take a different approach. It's not, it seems like really time consuming, but I swear by this method. All of you have seen these tiny planters, seedling planters. It's got a 6-pack in each. Instead of planting one, I plant 4. So what I do is I put 4 seeds into each planter. And as it grows to this size over here, you have the first 2 leaves called dicotyledon, or simply dicot. With dicot plus the second set of leaves, you may start splitting them, because at this stage, the roots are getting ready to creep out of the pot. If you leave it any longer, it may become root bound. So once you separate, you have 2 choices. One is to continue and plant it back into the same planter, except you would have to multiply that by 4. A tray like this would give you 288 if you plant 4. It's got 72 cells times 4, so you have 288. So if all of them came to fruition, all of them have germinated properly, you would end up with 288 plants. So that means you have 4 trays of 72 you can share with your friends. Now traditionally, we do it this way. We spread it out, and then we start to pull out the ones that are weaker. Now, does that mean the weaker ones are never going to develop fully? No, it's not true. It just develops a bit slower, just like human beings. Some may develop faster, taller. Some may be stockier, but still healthy. So I feel that each seed has the opportunity to survive. So rather than throwing them out, I would plant them all. I give away my seedlings with friends and family. So another reason I do that is when you plant these seeds, some may not germinate, and it looks kind of depressing. Do you like your bookshelves kind of back and forth, not lined up like the library? I don't think so. So my approach is to plant seedling first, and then I transfer them to a larger pot. And every tray contains seedlings that are of the same height. So it looks consistent, looks really nice. Like this. And I plant it on concrete. So I can control slugs. Slugs are not likely to travel a long distance over concrete. So this is easier to manage rather than planting it directly into the soil, because things like onion, I don't think snails like to eat onion because it has a really strong odor, or garlic. However, when they first germinate, the sprouts are young and very tender, and the odor is not fully developed. So snails and slugs would devour everything in sight. That's another reason for me to do that. And this is the lava melon, I guess you call it, or bitter melon. They like heat. So if you try to germinate them early, like late February or March, some may germinate, some may not. And it looks, I don't know, I like to see things fully running, all 8 cylinders running. So I want them to be consistent. It looks a lot better. It's therapeutic to be looking at plants that are doing really well. So take a look at this video here. I have a plant with, in addition to the dicots, I have, and a worm, caterpillar, I have 4 leaves coming out. And as soon as I dump it out, you'll take a look at the roots. It's not root bound yet, but it's almost saturated, and this is the right time to transplant. So, go ahead.
Don't you straighten out those roots? It's a little bit bounded, right?
No, it's not. It's not.
Okay.
You could, but you may hurt the roots, unless you have a surgeon's hand. It's not necessary. And then, one mistake most people make is they try to firm up the soil. That's not a good thing to do. You may press gently from the outside, but never press down. When you press down against the soil near the stem, it's like I'm choking your neck. Same idea. Don't do that. Instead, this is a bad example, by the way, because the soil is really dry. So before you plant, you need to moisten the soil first. So when there's moisture, there's adhesion. And adhesion will bring about capillarity. Capillary action, raise your hand if you don't understand capillary.
毛细现象。
You have blood vessels, you have vein, you have artery. Where the 2 cross over each other, that's called the capillary, the very fine blood vessels. So with plants, you might have seen 2 pieces of glass that come together and you put a drop of water and suddenly it would rise. That's capillarity. So when you have some moisture on all surfaces of the soil and organic materials, it would conduct water down rather than getting repelled because they are air pockets and there's no adhesion. It's repelling water. So ideally, I should have the soil moistened first before I plant it. And once you start the water may become a bit more, may settle. Now, that's not compaction as if you were to water with a hose. It keeps on hitting the same spot with water force. It may force the soil to go down, be compacted. That's not a good thing to do. You would use a scoop or a tiny cup like this. I usually use one of these. I know how much water do you use, 4 ounces. And water will be absorbed quickly.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Question that I've been wanting to ask. Where do you put your camera? Because I saw you use 2 hands. Where do you use that? Is it a trade secret?
Let me do a demo.
Okay.
Ideally, your camera, your phone or camera should be in a waterproof case or water resistant. So you can hose it off because when I'm in the garden, I'm full of dirt.
And shockproof too.
Right. Okay, I turn it on and I put it between my knees. Very difficult. Now sometimes I grab bricks, I stack them up, and then I get my Corona pruner and the handles right on the brick, and this is at an angle. And the Corona pruner is holding the phone, and it's rock solid. There's a video you'll see a little later on how rock solid it is. And it went on for 2 minutes, so it's not my niece doing the job, no. Another question? So I find the phone to be very handy rather than DSLR and all these huge pieces of equipment. Now, everybody's heard about deep watering as we have a water crisis, really. We've had it for the last 7, 8 years. On the record, I'll tell you, I'm against that practice. I'm totally against it. Because when you have a delivery system like this, it's okay. It's okay to supplement your existing watering system on the surface in the drip zone, within the drip line. I call it drip zone. I haven't seen any documentation. I simply call it drip zone. Drip zone, how I define it, is the circle outside of the trunk by about 8 inches, because that area is supposed to stay dry. So outside of the area and within the drip line. If you project a shadow directly from above, the shadow area is called the drip zone, what I call it. So every year you may fertilize 3 times on your trees, maybe at least once. You will spread compost, fertilizer. I usually do a blend of compost and fertilizer, 50-50 or more compost, depends on the situation. I would blend it first, make sure it's a homogeneous mixture. Of course, compost comes in different quality, so I made myself one of these. It's a very simple device. You get 4 pieces of 1x4, nail the frame, and you put hardware cloth, 1/4 inch hardware cloth, and then you add these L-shaped brackets down the bottom and staple it with the staple gun. You may want to wrap this hardware cloth around so it has more grab, so it doesn't just fall off. But I've been using this for the last 7 years. It hasn't fallen off yet. But for more sturdy construction, you may want to wrap it around. On top, I have these 4 brackets. This company no longer makes it, and there's a substitute at Lowe's. Corner brace, a set of it's about $4, and you can nail them to the corner. This will practically last forever. You can pass it on to your grandkids. So once you have loosened up the compost, you get the bigger particles aside. I typically separate them. The rocks, you could see rocks and sometimes nails. Nails are fine. Rusty nails could be used as iron for your citrus tree. But I put them aside, and then I blend it with my granular citrus fertilizer, because citrus fertilizer could be used for most fruit trees, such as avocado, plum, peach, you name it. It's a general purpose fertilizer for those fruit trees. So I would scratch the top surface about 3 inches, loosen up the soil, and scratch the fertilizer into it on the top surface. How else are you going to do it? If you think that this is the end-all solution on watering, then the top surface is dry. But if you scratch maybe 5 inches down, you'll see a lot of roots. Those are called the feeder roots. They deliver nutrients and also water to the tree. It's not just deep down. So if you choose to use this method and only this method, as you can see, these holes are distributing water in different directions. However, the holes are not big enough for granular fertilizer to go through. So your only choice would be liquid fertilizer. Now, liquid fertilizer is very limited, and you cannot deliver compost. You can only use so much warm excretion and mix it down through the stake, watering stake. So eventually it may become clogged up, and roots may grow into it. So I don't think it's a good idea. It could be used as a supplement but not be used as a dominant watering method. Simply because when you fertilize the topsoil and you water regularly within the drip zone, the nutrients would be taken down deep into the soil. And I'm sure you heard of a dry cycle. Some trees you can maintain the dry and wet cycle. Citrus is one of those. However, you don't want it to be dried up completely. When it dries up completely, I'll show you a video later on where there is no adhesion and there is no capillarity. So the water stays on top and you get frustrated because you think your soil is bad. No, it's your method of watering. Your maintenance of moisture is not proper. And you start to seek other ways to fix it, which you'll see later on. So this is how I water a newly planted tomato. The scoop is 1 quart. And I can count 1, 2, or depends on the situation. Watering is not about fixed interval. Watering has to do with wind speed, humidity, temperature, and soil condition. All these have to be taken into account. You don't necessarily water 1 quart every day or every other day. That's not a good idea. Would you like to eat the same food every day? I don't think so. Plants, they do vary.